She grew up in a one-room cabin with no running water, one of 12 kids sharing hand-me-down clothes sewn from scraps. Nobody in that house could have imagined that the little girl singing on the porch would end up owning a theme park, writing over 3,000 songs, and becoming one of the most beloved human beings on the planet. For 80 years, she did exactly that. And on August 25, 2026, the world lost her. This is the story of how a girl from Locust Ridge, Tennessee became Dolly Parton, and how she spent every single day of her extraordinary life giving more than she ever took. Dolly Rebecca Parton was born in January 1946, the fourth of 12 children crammed into that tiny cabin in the Smoky Mountains. Her family had almost nothing, but they had music. Her mother filled the house with old hymns and mountain ballads, and it didn't take long for Dolly to start singing along. When she was still a young girl, her uncle Bill Owens noticed something in her and bought her first guitar. That guitar changed everything. By age 10, she was already performing on a local television variety show in Knoxville. 3 years later, at just 13 years old, she stood on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, the biggest stage in country music, and sang in front of a live audience like she'd been doing it her whole life. Most people would call that a dream come true. For Dolly, it was just the beginning. The day she graduated high school, she didn't stick around Tennessee to figure out her next move. She packed her bags and headed straight for Nashville. Her early singles flopped. Nobody was lining up to sign her. But she kept writing, kept showing up, and eventually broke through, not as a singer at first but as a songwriter, penning Dumb Blonde, which gave her her first real taste of chart success. She'd made it to Nashville with nothing but a guitar and a plan. What happened next would turn her into a star. In 1967, Dolly's big break came in the form of a partnership. Country star Porter Wagoner brought her on as his duet partner on his hit television show, and almost overnight, millions of viewers who'd never heard of her were watching her every week. It was Wagoner who helped get her signed to RCA Records, and for the next several years, the two of them dominated the country charts together as a duo. But Dolly wasn't content to just be someone's partner. She wanted her own name in lights. In 1971, she landed her first solo No.1 hit with Joshua, proving she didn't need anyone else to carry a song to the top. Then came the run that would define her career. Jolene hit in 1973, a song about heartbreak and jealousy that would go on to become one of the most covered songs in music history. A year later came I Will Always Love You, written, as she later revealed, as a farewell to Porter Wagoner himself when she finally decided to leave his show and go out on her own. She was right to bet on herself. By 1977, she'd crossed over from country radio into the pop mainstream. Here You Come Again, introducing her voice to an entirely new audience who had no idea she'd already spent a decade becoming a legend in Nashville. She'd left one partnership behind to build something bigger, and her next move would take her somewhere no one expected, Hollywood. In 1980, Dolly stepped onto the big screen for the first time in 9 to 5, playing a scorned secretary alongside Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin. The movie was a massive hit, and suddenly she wasn't just a country star, she was a movie star too. She followed it up 2 years later with The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, and by the end of the decade she'd cemented herself as a genuine acting talent with her role in 1989's Steel Magnolias, a film that still makes audiences cry to this day. But the most surprising turn of her career didn't happen on a movie set. It happened when a song she'd written more than 15 years earlier landed in the hands of one of the biggest voices in the world. In 1992, Whitney Houston recorded I Will Always Love You for The Bodyguard, and the song exploded into a global phenomenon. It became one of the best-selling singles of all time. And here's the part most people don't realize. Because Dolly had written it, every time that song played on the radio, in a movie theater at a wedding, she got the songwriting credit and the royalties. A song written as a quiet goodbye to her old mentor ended up making her one of the wealthiest songwriters in music history. She'd conquered country, pop and film, But her next chapter wasn't about chasing more fame, it was about giving it away. By the mid-1980s, Dolly had the money and the fame to do whatever she wanted. What she wanted was to give back to the region that raised her. In 1985, she opened Dollywood in the East Tennessee mountains she grew up in, turning her hometown area into a destination that would go on to create thousands of jobs for the community. 3 years later, she launched the Dollywood Foundation, aimed at helping local kids succeed in school. But it was 1995 that gave her the project she'd become most beloved for. She started the Imagination Library, a simple idea with a massive impact. Mail a free book to a child every single month from the time they're born until they start school. It began as a small program in her home county. It grew into a global movement, eventually gifting hundreds of millions of books to children all over the world, a number that kept climbing every single year she was alive. She never talked about her generosity to boost her image. She just kept doing it, quietly decade after decade, long after she had any reason left to prove herself to anyone. She'd spent her whole life giving, but even icons face loss. And what happened to her personally would test her in a way none of her success ever had. Behind all the fame, Dolly had one relationship that stayed remarkably private for almost 60 years. She met Carl Dean on her very first day in Nashville, at a laundromat, before she'd sung a single note in the city that would make her famous. They married in May of 1966, and unlike almost everything else in her life, Carl mostly stayed out of the spotlight by choice. He rarely appeared in public with her, rarely gave interviews, and seemed perfectly happy letting Dolly shine while he stayed home. That quiet partnership lasted nearly 6 decades. Then, in March of 2025, Dolly announced that Carl had died at the age of 82. "Carl and I spent many wonderful years together," she wrote at the time. "Words can't do justice to the love we shared for over 60 years. In the months that followed, she was honest about how hard the loss hit her. At an appearance at Dollywood in early 2026, she told fans she'd been worn down and worn out from grief. Admitting her health had taken a toll she hadn't expected, she postponed a Las Vegas residency. She reassured worried fans with a simple message: "I ain't dead yet." For a woman who'd spent her whole life taking care of everyone else, this was one of the first times the world watched her quietly struggling to take care of herself. Nobody knew it yet, but that struggle was only the beginning of what was coming. Through 2026, the health issues Dolly had been open about didn't fully go away. In May, she made the difficult decision to cancel a planned Las Vegas show, revealing she'd been dealing with ongoing kidney problems for years. She even joked about it in her own way, saying doctors were pulling more kidney stones out of her than a rock quarry could produce. But underneath the humor, she admitted her immune system and digestive health had been out of balance for a couple of years, and she was working hard to rebuild her strength. By mid-August, the situation had grown more serious. She had to back out of an appearance at Dollywood, telling fans her doctor had clipped her wings and ordered her not to travel. Then, according to her team, she was diagnosed with cancer. What followed was described as a brief but difficult battle. On August 25, 2026, surrounded by the people who loved her most, Dolly Parton passed away at Vanderbilt Ingram Cancer Center in Nashville. She was 80 years old. Her family's statement said she died peacefully. Her publicist later confirmed she had bravely fought her illness until the very end. The woman who had spent 60 years lifting up everyone around her was finally at rest. But her story didn't end there. What happened next showed just how many lives she'd touched. Within hours of the news breaking, tributes poured in from every corner of the world. Flags were ordered lowered to half staff across the country for a full week in her honor. In Sevier County, Tennessee, the place where she was born with nothing, the mayor declared a day of mourning for the woman who'd given the region everything. In New York City, the Empire State Building lit up in sparkling pink lights, a quiet nod to 9 to 5. Fans gathered at her star on Nashville's Music City Walk of Fame, leaving flowers and candles that burned through the night. just steps from the Ryman Auditorium stage where a 13-year-old girl once sang in front of an audience for the first time. Musicians, actors, and politicians from every corner of public life shared their own memories of her, but maybe the most fitting tribute wasn't a statement or a lit-up building. It was simple math. Over the decades, her imagination library had mailed hundreds of millions of free books into the hands of children who might never have owned one otherwise. Every single one of those kids grew up with a piece of her kindness in their hands, whether they ever knew her name or not. She asked, in lieu of flowers, that people donate to that same program instead of sending anything to her family. Even in death, she found a way to keep giving. Dolly Parton came from a one-room cabin with no running water. She left behind a legacy that reached into millions of homes around the world, through her music, her films, her generosity, and the quiet, unshakable kindness she carried through every single year of her 80 years on this earth. The girl from Locust Ridge became something the world rarely gets, a legend who was loved just as much as she was admired.